A landlocked country thousands of kilometers from Kenya's coast has just said it wants a stake in a $16 billion refinery at Lamu. And that may be more important than the refinery itself. Because Rwanda isn't simply talking about buying fuel from Kenya, it wants to potentially own part of the infrastructure supplying it. Kenya could take a 10% stake. Ethiopia has expressed interest. And Rwanda's president Paul Kagame has now confirmed that Kigali is in preliminary discussions about joining the project. Together, the regional stake being discussed could be worth around $1.5 billion. The proposed refinery could process 700,000 barrels of crude every day. But here's the bigger question. Why is East Africa suddenly interested in owning a refinery on Kenya's northern coast? Because Lamu could become something much bigger than a refinery. It could become East Africa's next energy gateway. And if that happens, the competition between Lamu, Mombasa, Tanga, and even Djibouti could become a lot more serious. East Africa has a strange contradiction. The region produces oil, but many economies still depend heavily on imported refined petroleum products. Uganda has discovered oil. South Sudan has oil. Kenya has oil. Yet having crude underground is not the same thing as having fuel. You need ports, storage terminals, pipelines, refineries, roads, railways, and most importantly, a corridor connecting all of them. That is why East Africa's energy competition is becoming a competition over geography. Which port gets the crude? Which refinery processes it? Which corridor carries the fuel inland? And which countries become dependent on that system? For years, Mombasa has occupied a central position. Tanga is gaining importance. Dar es Salaam remains critical. Djibouti dominates Ethiopia's trade connection. But now there is another player, Lamu. Aliko Dangote has already shown what happens when you build refining capacity at enormous scale. His Lagos refinery has a capacity of 650,000 barrels per day. Now Dangote wants to build another giant refinery in East Africa. The proposed Lamu facility would have a capacity of 700,000 barrels per day, putting it in the same league as his Nigerian operation. And the proposed market is not just Kenya. It includes Uganda, South Sudan, Rwanda, and Ethiopia. That changes the calculation. Because a refinery designed to supply one country is one thing. A refinery designed to supply an entire region is something else. So why Lamu? This is where the geography becomes fascinating. Dangote's project originally had Tanga in Tanzania under consideration. Kenya later emerged as the preferred country. Mombasa was initially considered, but then the project moved north to Lamu. And Lamu has one strategic advantage. It sits at the beginning of a corridor designed to push Kenya's coast deeper into the interior. The Lapset corridor was conceived to connect Lamu with northern Kenya, Ethiopia, and South Sudan. Crude arrives by sea, it enters Lamu, it gets refined. Fuel moves inland. Storage and logistics develop around it, and suddenly the refinery is no longer an isolated project. It becomes an anchor for a corridor. That is the first reason Lamu matters. On August 24th, President Paul Kagame said Rwanda would be happy to participate in the investment, while stressing discussions are at an early stage. And that tells us something important. Rwanda is landlocked. It cannot simply build a port. It cannot choose its geography. So countries like Rwanda have to think differently about energy security. They have to secure the corridors that bring fuel into the country. If Lamu becomes a major refining hub, Rwanda could move from being a customer to becoming an investor in the infrastructure behind it. A customer asks, how much does the fuel cost? An investor also asks, how well does the infrastructure perform? And that is why Rwanda's interest is strategically significant. Pillar 3, the $1.5 billion question. Dangote has reportedly opened the project to a combined 30% regional equity stake. Kenya could take 10%, valued at roughly $500 million. Ethiopia and Rwanda have also expressed interest. The total regional allocation has been put at around $1.5 billion, but this isn't just about raising money. It could change the political structure of the project. Imagine Kenya, Ethiopia, and Rwanda all becoming shareholders. Now the refinery has regional owners, regional customers, regional political interests, and potentially regional governments with something to lose if the project fails. That gives Dangote something extremely valuable, a built-in regional constituency. But it also creates a question. Will these countries actually put the money in? And will they commit to buying enough fuel to justify the investment? Because that is where the real battle begins. Pillar 4, the Ethiopia angle. For Horn Times, this may be the most important part of the story. Ethiopia. Ethiopia is one of Africa's largest economies. It is also landlocked, and its access to international trade depends heavily on external corridors. Djibouti has become the dominant gateway for Ethiopian trade. That network is already established, so Lamu is not about replacing Djibouti tomorrow. It isn't. But strategic infrastructure does not have to replace an existing corridor to matter. It only needs to create an alternative. If Lamu develops a massive refinery, port infrastructure, and reliable fuel distribution network, Kenya could eventually offer Ethiopia another route into the regional energy system. And that changes the strategic equation. Because Kenya would not simply be competing with Tanzania for cargo, it could be competing for a place inside Ethiopia's energy security architecture. That is a much bigger game. The twist. This is not really Lamu versus Mombasa. At first glance, this looks like a battle between two Kenyan ports. Lamu versus Mombasa, but that's too small. The real contest is much larger. Look at the map. Mombasa has the established northern corridor. Tanga has the strategic connection to Uganda's oil system. Dar es Salaam anchors Tanzania's central corridor. Djibouti dominates Ethiopia's established maritime gateway. And now, Lamu. Lamu has the Indian Ocean. It has the planned refinery. It has the Lapset vision. And it sits close to the northern corridor into some of the region's most strategically important landlocked markets. So the question isn't, which port is biggest? The question is, which corridor can control the next generation of East African energy trade? The Tanga problem. And Tanzania has a powerful counterargument. Uganda's oil is being connected to the Tanzanian coast through the East African crude oil pipeline. That gives Tanga a direct role in Uganda's petroleum story. Tanzania also has its own ambitions to become a regional energy and logistics hub. So Lamu is entering a market where infrastructure is already being built around competing corridors. This means Dangote isn't entering an empty map. He is entering a race, and every kilometer of pipeline, every storage terminal, every refinery, and every long-term fuel contract could determine which corridor wins. This is perhaps the biggest thing to understand. The refinery itself may not be the ultimate prize. The prize is the ecosystem around it. The project has been discussed as part of a wider energy and infrastructure development that could include port and petrochemical facilities. Think about what that means. Crude arrives, storage handles it, the refinery processes it. Petrochemicals create additional value. Finished fuel leaves the facility. Trucks and pipelines carry it inland. Businesses follow. Warehouses appear, industrial zones expand, and suddenly, Lamu becomes an energy city. That is how a port transforms into a power center. Not because ships arrive, but because entire supply chains begin to depend on it. But this is where the optimism has to stop. Because a 700,000 barrel per day refinery is an enormous bet, the first risk is financing. The refinery alone is being described as a roughly $16 billion project, while some estimates vary depending on what wider infrastructure is included. The second is crude supply. A refinery this large needs enormous and reliable volumes of crude. The third is market competition. Imported petroleum products can still compete aggressively on price. And the fourth may be the biggest. Will East Africa actually use Lamu at the scale Dangote needs? Because building the refinery is only half the battle. You have to fill it, you have to sell the products, and you have to move those products thousands of kilometers inland. That requires roads, pipelines, storage, rail, border infrastructure, and political agreements. Without that network, a giant refinery is simply a giant refinery. And this brings us back to Rwanda. Why would a country with no coastline want a stake in a refinery on Kenya's coast? Because Kigali may be looking beyond the refinery. It may be looking at the corridor. Ethiopia may be doing the same. Kenya certainly is. And Dangote? He may be trying to create something even larger than his Lagos operation. a regional refining hub serving an entire economic bloc. That is why the $1.5 billion regional stake matters. It isn't just capital. It is a potential vote of confidence in Lamu as a regional energy gateway. So the real story isn't that Dangote wants to build a $16 billion refinery in Kenya. The real story is that East Africa is beginning to compete over where its energy future will be built. Mombasa has the advantage of history. Tanga has Uganda's oil connection. Djibouti has Ethiopia's established trade network. But Lamu has something different. A chance to build an integrated energy corridor almost from the ground up. And if Dangote succeeds, Lamu could process hundreds of thousands of barrels of crude every day. Rwanda could become a shareholder. Ethiopia could become a major customer. Kenya could become an energy hub. And the northern Indian Ocean coast could become one of the most important fuel gateways into East Africa. But if financing stalls, if crude supply becomes difficult, if regional demand doesn't materialize, the $16 billion dream could become a gamble. So this isn't a story about a refinery. It's a story about geography, energy, and power. And the winner won't necessarily be the country with the most oil. It could be the corridor that controls where the oil becomes fuel. So what do you think? Can Lamu really challenge Mombasa, Tanga, and Djibouti? Subscribe to Horn Times for more.